Shabbat Shalom. I received a text message from my son yesterday as he was preparing his now weekly Shabbat dinner and get together with some friends where they discuss the Torah portion. And he said, "Mom, I'm all ready for the golden calf. And here I have dolphin skins and acacia wood." So bless him. He knows what major plot twist is going to be coming, still a little ways off. In the meantime, the children of Israel are asked to pause. They are asked to wait, as I asked my son to do, and to think about the concept of making a little space, of beginning to create a sacred and holy precinct that relies so much on the notion of generosity. We can imagine that the people looked at one another, camped at the base of Mount Sinai. As Moses sits in deep conclave with God, they look at one another and say, "Now what?" The revelation and the Reed Sea are physically behind them, though the reverberations of those miracles surely were echoing in their waking thoughts and probably very vivid dreams. They were probably exhilarated and exhausted. But this was a people accustomed to working hard, and work they shall do. At this point, instead of forced labor, under the whip of the Egyptian taskmasters, this is an altogether different sort of effort. This is going to be work with sacred intention, volitional, devotional, and generous. And we will never know the conditions under which our ancestors were compelled to accept the Torah, though we have some colorful imaginings as to what went on before they said, "Okay, we will do and we will hear." But in Parshat Truma, God invites each and every one of them to help build the portable sanctuary, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, with gifts brought by every person whose heart is moved. In Hebrew, yidvenu, to do so. It was at the beginning of our Torah portion, Exodus 25, verse 2. The enumerated gifts are sumptuous: precious metals, gemstones, animal skins, fine linens, and the choicest of oils and spices. After centuries of owning nothing, the ragtag former slaves must have been thrilled with their haul. And yet, in order, as God says, to make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, they have to clear out some essential space. Nedivut halev, generosity of the heart, is a crucial element of these gifts for the sanctuary. The concept of nedivut, generosity, shares its root with yidvenu of verse 2, a moved heart, as Rashi says, and emphasizes here particularly the free will nature of the offerings. The detail in this and subsequent chapters is extensive, and the instructions for the tabernacle are repeated and lengthy. But the giving must begin with mind and heart focused in order for the divine presence to descend. We live in an excessively materialistic culture. That's not news. And we often associate generosity instinctively with money, but there are so many ways to be generous. And I'd love to ask you to take a little time today, tomorrow, and the days to come, talk, journal, meditate on ways that you feel moved to be generous in this world and ways that are difficult. There are so many ways to show nedivut, with time, our most precious commodity, food, friendship, extra clothing, household items, kindness, prayers, forgiveness, compassion. The list is thankfully expansive and limitless. You all know that at this point in our journey, my core spiritual practice, yes, is Musar. And with it, that I find so useful, not just on a daily basis, my friends, but sometimes on an hourly and even minute by minute basis, is the opportunity to look inside ourselves and examine our habits, tendencies, and personal histories. In Alan Marinus's Everyday Holiness, he has a really marvelous chapter. Well, they're all terrific, but I love the chapter on generosity, and I return to it over and over and over again. And one of the stories I don't tell that often from this chapter because I don't often have opportunity is a story on generosity, one that you've heard me tell before, and one that I would like to share a little bit anew today. Alan speaks of encountering unthinkable numbers of people in need while he was traveling in India, and the heart-sinking feeling of knowing he could never help them all. And we can all relate to that, and much closer to home. Even and especially in these cities of plenty, the terrible reality of uncountable people who are destitute hits us in the gut every time we go out. And even if we never left our homes, our real and virtual mailboxes send wave after wave of solicitations for worthy people and causes all around the world. So how do we find generosity? How do we focus it? How do we come offering up ourselves? As Rabbi Simcha Zissel tells us, looking at this verse, whoever is of a willing heart, let him bring it, an offering to the Almighty. Rabbi Simcha says, what are you supposed to bring? You're supposed to bring your heart. But how do you bring your heart when it gets so easily broken? Isn't it natural to just want to protect it? So in this story about India, Alan references his teacher, the Ram Das, whose born name was Richard Alpert, who also felt utterly overwhelmed by the burden of aiding his fellow human beings, animals, and the planet. He tried to lean on rationality and hierarchy of need, but that didn't help. There was too much to do, and not enough of him or any of us on our own to go around. Instead, he cultivated the practice of following his inner voice and giving as his heart moved him. I found that deceptively simple teaching to be really profoundly impactful. How is any of us supposed to choose the most deserving hospital, research project, animal sanctuary, environmental organization, relief work, religious or justice-seeking group from all of the infinitely worthy choices? By learning slowly to give as my own heart moves me, I've also mostly stopped punishing myself about the pitiful size of the gifts or the boundless number of good people and concerns to whom and to which I can only offer a prayer, sometimes an actual kiss to the envelope, and a wish for better times ahead. The Musar teachers speak of timtum halev, the opposite of nedivut halev. Timtum halev, a blocked or a barricaded heart. It's the feeling that we just can't give anymore, usually out of fear that if we give too much away, there'll just be less of us. But Hebrew is so helpful here. The word vinatnu, and they gave, is a palindrome. It goes both ways. Embedded in the glorious ancient holy language is the lesson that giving generously enhances both the giver and the receiver in a circle of reciprocal benefit. And that is as it should be. Vinatnu. It goes both ways. Story that I don't get to tell too often, but that I think about a lot in Alan's beautiful chapter on generosity, on nedivut, or word for the day, is he speaks about somebody who was having difficulty with a colleague at work. And in this fractious and divided time, my goodness, can't we all relate to this? But she had to work with this person with whom she was having a particular problem. She said, our styles and worldviews and priorities were very different. Really an understatement. But with a focus on generosity, she said to herself, well, perhaps I can come to this relationship with the generosity of spirit that I need. Generosity of spirit. which to me means not always having to be right, and to accept that not only do I not have to change this other person, but I probably can't. So, can I ask myself to be generous enough to give her way of being in the world space to operate? You can all think of somebody who could use our generosity of spirit, if and only if, to save ourselves from additional unnecessary anxiety and stress that those kind of relationships cause. It's hard to do, but try that on for size. With someone with whom you profoundly disagree, and maybe it's the old agree to disagree type of approach, but it's more than that. It's a generosity of spirit to yourself and to another human being who sees the world in a very different way. Can we be generous enough to give another person's way of being in the world space to operate? Try it on for size. See if a little bit of tikkun, a little bit of healing results, at least for you. And we've also all known people about whom it's said they are generous to a fault. And that's acknowledged here too. Some people don't give enough, and others give way too much, neglecting their own health and well-being. This is not a virtue. Neglect of self and home is not a virtue. The goal is to strike an artful, delicate balance, and this is called a practice because it takes a lot of it, probably a lifetime. These times call upon us to be inordinately generous. And it's hard when we might lean toward maybe too much self-preservation, and yet it's understandable. And when we see so much stinginess in the world, it's hard to be among the people who care, but it's the only way to be. It is the Jewish way to be. In the driving rain yesterday, I went to pick up Eli, and I saw a giant billboard that said, "Love is the most powerful force in the universe." And to my delight, it was a billboard not from a community we might have expected, but it was the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles, taking out a big giant billboard on Ventura Boulevard, making us incredibly vulnerable still in times where we really are feeling under siege. Not for nothing is the cover of the Jewish Journal this week a giant Jewish star and the headline that says, "On Edge." It's hard to keep a generous heart. But let's keep trying, shall we? The Israelites saw God's wonders and they heard the divine word. They committed as one to following the mitzvot, and they were ready for the next steps. Now they needed to get to work. They will part with valuable items as raised offerings, trumot, for holy purpose, leaving us with what I think is one of Judaism's most enduring and wise teachings. Live modestly, give generously, and do it with a good heart.